think that the sulfur reduction in fuel oil is going to greatly benefit the world's environment, in particular for countries that are near ports, because at the moment the cap is 3.5% and therefore you're effectively reducing it sevenfold. As everyone knows, when the fuel is burnt, the sulfur gets oxidized and you get sulfur dioxide in the air. And sulfur dioxide is what causes what's known as acid rain. And in the 1950s in the UK, in London, there was the Great Smog, and the number of people estimated to have died during just a very short period of time is 4,000 to 7,000 people. So if you multiply that into the amount of sulfur dioxide that's currently being released from fuel oil, from marine fuel oil, that accounts for about 7% of the world's fuel oil consumption, then you can easily start to see that by reducing the sulfur content in marine fuel, you will have a great impact on the environment. So compliance with the regulation in relation to the sulfur content in fuel can come in a number of ways. So either the ships will have to burn low sulfur fuel oil, and obviously any ship can effectively do that as long as it's willing to spend the additional about $250 per ton in buying low sulfur fuel oil. A second option is for the ship to buy scrubbers, to install scrubbers on board the ships. And that means that whilst it can use high sulfur fuel oil, as that fuel is being burnt through the engines of the ship, the scrubbers will reduce the sulfur content, and therefore the amount of sulfur that's released into the environment is reduced. The third option is LNG fuel. LNG fuel is compliant with all the IMO regulations, and if vessels fit engines that can burn or operate on gas, then they would also be compliant with the 2020 regulations. The other thing ship owners can do is bury their head in the sand and hope that these regulations aren't going to happen. I can say that I'm reasonably sure, you can never be totally sure, but I am reasonably sure that these regulations are going to happen, and therefore owners do need to look about whether they're going to fit scrubbers, change the engines to LNG, change the vessels to being LNG operated, or whether they're going to buy low sulfur fuel oil and I guess pass the cost on to the consumer. I think this is quite a difficult one. When you don't act in accordance with MARPOL Annex 6, which is where these regulations are going to appear, you can have fines imposed on you as ship owners. MARPOL have also recognized, I think the IMO has also recognized, that they're not going to be able to always enforce the regulations, and what they are looking at doing is introducing effectively an offence of carrying fuel oil with a high sulfur content if you don't have scrubbers on board. And that will be an easier offence to catch people out on, because you'll be able to test the fuel that is on board. I think those will come, there will be penalties imposed on ship owners. The bigger risk, I guess, is whether a ship, because it's in breach of the MARPOL regulation, will be considered to be unseaworthy, and therefore is it insured? Does it risk jeopardizing its insurance position, or does it risk being in default of the contractual obligations? So for example, if a charterer will have an obligation to ensure that the ship has got fuel oil that is compliant with the IMO regulations, and therefore the charterer may be in breach if he places oil on board that is not in compliance with the IMO regulations. But really we're not really sure yet, and I guess we won't be sure until the first half of 2020 exactly what sanctions and consequences will be there for those who choose to ignore the regulations. The aim of our shipping brief today, at least, is to allow people to know what the issues are and to concentrate on what their solutions are in terms of whether owners are going to take any of the solutions that I mentioned. As we get closer to 2020, we're going to have some rather specific topics focusing on charter parties, focusing on fuel oil requirements within the ship owner and exactly what they want to have in place in order to protect their contractual position. We also hope to work more closely with ports so that we can help them implement the regulations that are going to be needed. Also, the reality is if LNG, which is really where I'm going to end with my talk today, if LNG is the way forward, a lot of infrastructure is needed at ports in order for these new LNG-powered vessels to take LNG as a fuel. And therefore, we will be working, Ince and Co will be working with the ports and with the owners of LNG-powered vessels to see what are the technical and the legal issues that they have to face in order to achieve the reality of having a fleet of LNG-powered vessels.
The legal system of handling claims in UAE, especially handling claims with the ports, will differ from one port to another. Each port has its terms and conditions and the practicality involving that. When the port has a claim against the port users, especially ship owners, the port may decide to detain the ship for a security. This security, as I said, will differ from one port to another. Some ports will insist to have cash, some ports can accept clubs, P&I clubs, letter of undertaking. So the owners should know which port they are dealing with and the ways of handling this claims, and also they need to know that before entering the port, and everybody should be aware of that procedures. Now UAE is preparing for a new maritime law, and hopefully we can see that soon. Also, it's not just a matter of law. We need in UAE to have specialized judges specialized in maritime law who can deal with this sort of claims. We have now IMAC, which is a specialized maritime arbitration forum. This will help definitely in attracting more foreign investments, but this will be better if we have it on the wider scale and to have also more specialized maritime judges. For the unsafe ports accident, the ship owners will need to do due diligence on the port they are entering to, and if any incident happens, they should take the measures to preserve the evidence, and also they need to be aware of the rules of that port and the liabilities of different parties, the liabilities of the master, the pilot, and to find a way to preserve their liability. Of course, ship owners need to provide their crew with the available information about the port, about everything related to this port, so this can help them in navigating inside the port.
Ballast water management systems are a new reality of our industry that we just absolutely cannot get away from. Shipping not only has a responsibility to itself and to its players, but to society as a whole. And therefore, ballast water management systems are essentially shipping saying, we will make a massive contribution to the sustainability of the marine environment and to the environment as a whole. So I think the owners are ready. They've known what's been coming for a while with the EU ship recycling regulations, and it's going to be no surprise really when these come into force. The bigger question is, are the regulators ready to provide the supply to the demand for ship scrapping that there is going to be from EU owners? And if they are not ready, what is going to be done to facilitate the industry? In Europe, for starters, ship recycling is going to need to be a much more strategic decision. You're going to need to plan it very well. You are going to need to choose your yard extremely carefully. You are going to need to bear in mind not only your own profit margins, but also the effect that your ship might have on its environment once it's no longer yours. And therefore, in terms of the things that you need to think about, it's going to be a much more complex decision. Not complying is simply not an option. We've seen in sea trade this year, people risking going to jail. And therefore, non-compliance is just no longer on the agenda. The workarounds we used to use are no longer available. The authorities will start clamping down on them. And therefore, we need to find a situation that is going to be both profitable and economic for owners and also for the operators, but also in line with the environmental obligations that we have as an industry.